Well, doesn't the CIA flatly deny, they've admitted that there is some propaganda efforts, but their position is that those are all outside the United States, not in the United States. Isn't that true?
Absolutely. While we were running this Angolan operation and pumping these stories into the world and U.S. press, exactly that time, Bill Colby, the CIA director, was testifying to Congress, assuring them that we were extremely careful to make sure that none of our propaganda spilled back into the United States. And the very days that he was giving this false testimony, we were planting stories in the Washington Post. By that I mean not through Lusaka, but we actually flew a journalist from Paris to Washington to plant a false story. I mention it. I give the text of the story in my book.
So you planted a story in the Washington Post by bringing a man from abroad. You had no difficulty, got right past the editor with it?
Yeah.
Is this common? Is it easy?
It's easier than you would think, yes. Yes. If it's on the line of, for example, if it's on the line of Grenada being radical today, we've had articles in the Washington Post, the Star before it closed, Time magazine, that could only have been written originally by the CIA, Soviet submarine base, terrorist training. Here's a little island where the major source of income is selling spice to the West, Western tourism, and a large United States medical school. Tiny little island, 15 miles by 10 miles across, with 70,000 people, with U.S. medical students in their cutaways and sandals and their noses in books wandering all over the island. And yet major press organs, Time magazine, running stories about their being so radical.
If you haven't realized by now, we are under attack. And it seems in this day and age, it's from all sides. Well, it was made to be that way. Psychological operations are happening all around us. And many of us don't realize what is happening or what is going on because there is a war happening. It's a war for the final frontier. And I'm not talking about the universe. I'm talking about for our minds. As far back as Weimar Republic in Germany in the 1930s, there has been a level of psychological assault on the mindset of the human populace. And one such psychological operation that is permeate now is propaganda, the use thereof regarding the media, and now not just the media, but the internet as well, viral media. The German Nazi Party actually were the very first form of government to utilize propaganda as an effective tool. In the years leading up to Hitler's rise to power in the Weimar Republic, between the years 1933 and 1945, propaganda was the crucial instrument in acquiring and, of course, maintaining power to the implementation of certain Nazi policies led by its Reich minister, Joseph Goebbels. Now, to give you a little bit of a context about what Nazi propaganda was effective in, it used the structure of National Socialism, which is a far-right totalitarian political ideology, to demonize minority sects such as Jews and gypsies and capitalists and intellectuals, communists. And what it did was it promoted values asserted by the Nazi hierarchy. And these were led by people like Heydrich Himmler, Richard Heydrich, Reinhard Heydrich. And what these people did was they created the SS, which was a special form of police who used military tactics to basically arrest any dissidents within the structure of the country. And it was a warped ideology later on. In the beginning, many people were advocating for it, supporting it. They saw that the country was under economic duress through the sanctions of World War I. And also, they saw themselves as victim to competing global powers such as the United States and Great Britain, Russia, and France. But in time, the Nazi ideology became more twisted in its evolution of sorts, or de-evolution. And this involved a warped mix of Christianity and spiritualism, occultism, and soon enough, it began to dissolve. And because of World War II, Germany basically overextended their powers, fighting on multiple fronts. Well, the United States took interest in the issuance of the sciences and the psychological operations of Nazi Germany. How on earth was it possible for this country, which was under harsh economic sanctions, under harsh directives regarding the rebuilding of the military, to basically facilitate in quick time a country and then have much of the country in full support of allowing a dictator to rise in such short fashion. And this video, I want to talk about media manipulation. Now, for those who are familiar with me, I am not a Republican or a Democrat. I have voted only once in my life, and that was for Ross Perot. I don't believe in voting. I think the voting is actually supporting the institutes of power. And in this video, I also want to elaborate more on this false belief of left and right ideology. Now, there might have been at the time, probably before the Reagan administration, that there was a Republican and Democratic parties, that they acted in good faith. Those days are long gone. And in order to basically have you believe that there is a left and right paradigm, they need to manipulate you into believing this. And so far it's worked. And it's worked for a very long time. And what do I mean by media manipulation? Well, media manipulation is basically just a series of related techniques in which partisans create an image or or they'll have an argument that favors their particular interests. And what would that be to this in this day and age? Well, obviously, sexism is a huge point of divide in this country. Politics. I'm 53, and I can't tell you ever at a time in my life where I've seen such radical fundamentalism from people who have made themselves into this left and right paradigm. And I wouldn't dare say that Trumpers are representatives of the GOP, or that these authoritarians and anarchists, socialists, and whatnot are representative of the Democratic Party. In the truest sense, if you look at the definition of liberals, And if you look at the definition of conservatives, these people that I mentioned are not representatives of these ideologies at all. I don't know what these people represent, but they don't represent anything that I'm interested in. How about you? And all they have done is basically create the enemy that they desperately wanted. And instead of trying to commiserate or congregate one another and sit at a table and basically have a conversation, no, they'd rather have conflict. They'd rather antagonize, therefore creating the widening divide. Now, the tactics that the media will use, which basically will create this divide, are usually in the form of logical fallacies. If you look at OAN, or if you look at CNN, you'll notice that their techniques greatly differ in the use of logical fallacies or outright deception. That's another form. They'll even use rhetorical and very persuasive propaganda techniques that involve the suppression of points of views. What I'm saying is that the techniques differ in this fashion. And this is from my experience, is that people who are of this left paradigm are much more well-spoken, much more literate, and much more adept at deception. The use of words are really huge here, and you have to think. That's the one thing about the left. Now, I'll use Obama as an example. Look at Obama. Well-dressed, well-mannered, literate, Harvard constitutional graduate, beautiful-looking family, speaks eloquently, is not so much angry, but yet look at his actions. Actions speak louder than words. And you'll find almost absolutely zero difference between Obama and, say, George W. Bush Jr. The policies were similar. In fact, in some aspects, Obama was much worse than Bush. He expanded the surveillance state. He actually expanded the wars into Syria and Libya and destroyed those countries. Take a look at Trump. Trump is obtuse. He's loud. He doesn't speak eloquently. Doesn't have much of a college education. He's robust, in your face. But look at his actions. Any different than Obama? In fact, before the Trump administration, Obama dropped more drone strikes than any president in history, until Trump came along and dropped a hell of a lot more than Obama. Now, one thing about Trump is he didn't start a new war, but he continued the wars under Obama and under George W. Bush. So notice no real changes unless it happened in the country, where changes are noticeable to the American people and also very acidic, divisive. And so the left and right media that want to make you believe that there is a left and right will use very persuasive techniques. CNN will have, like, their pundits basically elaborate that the right are a threat to democracy, that they support fascism, that they support war, that they support certain brand of Christianity that is not resonating with the true aspects of Christ or with much of the country. Look at Fox News. They'll basically support the aspect of what it means to be American. Faith, religion, family. But they'll support certain aspects of war. they're not as eloquent as the speakers at CNN. In fact, they'll use X models, or they'll use very awkward looking men to basically use logical fallacies and deceptive techniques to basically facilitate this this needless divide that is happening in the country. They'll also support the idea that family structure is important, but yet they'll destroy families at the same time if it means that we need to spread this ideology. The left also supports the suppression of guns. The right does not, but they also support the suppression of media. And in the greater scheme of things, if you look at the constitutional directives, both in left and right are actually advocating for the suppression of these rights to the American people. But you have to agree to this. They can't just do it, because that would cause a revolt. They need to persuade you. In order to do that, they need to use the media as a way of basically manipulating you. And it's working. Currently, right now in Nashville and other states, there was a large protest going on about the Second Amendment, that we need more gun regulation, not realizing that the biggest murderers on earth, the U.S. federal government, are looking at all this, and it's the American people asking the same institution to basically become much more stricter when it comes to access of weapons. You're asking the biggest mass murderers on the planet, who actually sell more weapons to foreign entities than any place on the face of the earth, to regulate your access to weapons. Have you not read history about what the founding fathers, why they put the Second Amendment there? Basically is to basically keep the government honest. And here you are in the streets, instead of having the conversation about why we're such a violent country and why mass shootings happen. No, you're reactionists. And the media help to facilitate this. Look at CNN, look at MSNBC, look at CBS. Look at what they're doing. Subtle hints. Now it's much more obtuse, right in your face. To hell with the conservatives, to hell with the right. Meanwhile, the right is basically saying we need less regulation for weapons, in which they're right, but they're not helping matters, right? Why? Because they too are not addressing the problem of violence in this country. To them, the answer is more God, because they want an institute in which their perversion of religion to permeate through society, much in the way of Nazi Germany. Now, I'm not saying that we'll ever go back to the days of Nazi Germany. I think what will happen is basically we'll have a combination of Nazi Germany and, of course, Stalinist Russia. And we're already there. The ingredients are already there. And one such instance about what I'm talking about is Project Mockingbird. For those who don't know what Project Mockingbird is, basically Project Mockingbird was a directive that in which the CIA used, tried to institute their own officers to persuade certain media reporters to post a story. Now, I'll read the following here. This is from a CIA paper. It was a PDF document released, and I'm on page 21. And Project Mockingbird, which was a telephone intercept activity, was conducted between March 12th of 1963 and June 15th of 1963, and targeted two Washington-based newsmen who, at the time, had been publishing news articles based on and frequently quoting classified material of this agency and others, including top secret special intelligence. The intercept activity was particularly productive in identifying contacts of the newsmen, their method of operation, and many of their sources of information. For example, it was determined that during the period they received data from 13 newsmen, 12 whom were identified, 12 senators, 6 members of Congress, all identified, 21 congressional staff members, of whom 11 were identified, 16 government employees, including a staff member of the White House, members of the Vice President's office, an assistant attorney general, and other well-placed individuals. A number of other sources were partially or tentatively identified, but the short span of the activity precluded positive identification. It was observed that through these contacts, the newsmen actually received more classified and official data than they could use, and passed some of the stories to other newsmen for release, establishing that many leaks appearing under other by lines were actually from the sources of the target newsmen. That's 1963. 60 years ago. Now, in the early days of the Cold War, efforts were actually made by the US government to use the legacy or mass media to influence public opinion internationally, not just here. After the Watergate Committee in 1973, which uncovered domestic surveillance abuse directed by the executive branch of the US government, in which the New York Times in the following year, or in 1975, published an article by Seymour Hersh claiming that the CIA had violated its charter by spying on anti-war activists. This was happening in Vietnam, too. Happened in 2003 when there was mass global protests of the Iraq War as well. Now, there are many avenues that the federal government, through the use of the CIA and the US military, psychological operations divisions in the Army, that are basically manipulating the American people. And I'm not saying that every aspect of everyone in the media works for the intelligence services. It doesn't work like that. All they need is basically one or two placed people that are basically getting information that doesn't point to the CIA, but it points to another individual who is basically meeting, maybe through email or in person, somebody who may not be a CIA case officer at all, or maybe somebody that is meeting with somebody in the agency that is talking to that person, getting information whose sources are sometimes reputable and therefore could be considered a solid source, that could be getting information that could be published or broadcasted. Editors who are basically acting on orders of their managers, holding board meetings with their pundits and reporters, and basically talking about what stories are basically going to get us the ratings that we need to defeat our competitor. And those meetings basically will have those newsmen who are getting those sources from these people to basically publish. And therefore, that's how you can have a published story which doesn't have all the facts, that are basically divisive and basically manipulating the American people. Now, when it comes to the news, I haven't watched TV in 14 years, but when I see clips, I'm reticently noticing that there are no more broadcasts, but there are basically, the news today is one subliminal op-ed piece. In other words, all you have are these very intriguing faces that are basically telling you what you want to hear, not what you need to hear. And in this respect, you are basically being subliminally manipulated by these people into accepting the information, and which keeps you in a state of fear, paralysis, emotional turmoil, anger, frustration, regret. Hardly you'll ever see a really good feel story. And if it's a feel good story, it basically isn't very global. It only alienates a certain aspect of race or religion or politics or sexism. And so you won't have a very feel good story that resonates with everybody. It only will resonate a certain sect of society. And they want you involved in these sects. They don't want you to basically unify. I dare you to find me anyone in the legacy media that talks about the unification of the American people. You won't find any, because they're not interested in having a unified public. That would put power back in your hands, which you so gleefully and conveniently gave away by the people that you support with your money and your vote. They are making this in the hopes of controlling you further and further, but they need your acceptance. They need you to agree that we need to circumvent the Second Amendment, that we need to circumvent the 15th Amendment, the 16th Amendment, that we need to pass directives about what you can do and what you cannot do in your local and state proximities. We need to keep an eye on you. We need to make sure we know what you're watching, we know what you're listening to, what food you eat, what movies you like, what TV shows you watch, how you vote, how you feel, what you think. The final frontier, the battle for your mind. That's what this is about. And until we finally realize that these walls, these proverbial walls that were made for us, that are made to exist through this transparent identity called the media, that are given the weight behind the federal government and the intelligence services, like the CIA, till we finally realize that they're on the walls. There never was. That there is no black or white. That there is no Democrat and Republican. That there is no Christianity or Islam. That God is basically transcendent of these forms of ideology. And when you look at the old religions itself, Islam and Christianity, in the allegorical sense, and Judaism are one. But if you look at it through the linear sense, and you take it literally, these books, which weren't meant to be taken literally, it was subjective, you basically will see the human side of religion and not the spiritual side. even though I'm atheist. But I know what the books were talking about because this is one area of study I had before 9/11. Theology is basically talking about the human condition, something that we're losing. And this form of religion that we're experiencing, it's not anything to do with Islam. Wahhabism has nothing to do with Islam. Why are we friends with Saudi Arabia? Most Muslims would agree that Saudi Arabia is not an actual representative of Islam, and they are. The country was made on the precept of Muhammad ibn al-Wahhab, a nomad who created his own brand of Sunni Islam called Wahhabism, which created terrorists. Not Quranic at all. The settlers in Israel, these fanatical Haredi, people who go by the precepts of a radical late rabbi, Meir Kahane, and the Jewish Defense League that he founded. These are true representatives of Judaism. Is not one of the directives in Judaism that whoever saves one life saves the world entire? Well, Islam has that too. I think it's in Bukhari, the book of Bukhari, where it says that whoever takes one life, it's as if he has killed all of mankind. Christ in the New Testament says those who live by the sword will die by the sword. So you see the connection I'm talking about. The connection isn't there anymore. We have a war with people who are thinking they're true representatives of the true religion. The true religion is humanity, not Islam and not Christianity and not Judaism. You know, this belief that racism is what defines us. Your skin defines you and not your mind. When you're dead and you're in the ground, your skin rots away. So much for having that transcend up to where you're going, wherever you are. If you want to believe that we live on after we die. What about being involved with politics? So much that does for you in this life, and if you want to believe in the hereafter. What I'm saying is these walls are meant to keep you within and away from each other. And when you realize that these walls don't ever exist, and the prison that you have created for yourself is located right here, where there is a war going on for your mind, you will actually see the world in a much more clearer aspect than you realize. And you'll come to the horrifying conclusion that most of your life, from the day you can understand language to the present moment, you have basically been fed a lie. Not maliciously all the time. Your family, your friends, your associates, your teachers, the radio, the newspapers, the internet, billboards, most everywhere you go. Isn't basically a total lie, but it's not the total truth. You've been skewed just a little bit. Your perception of the world has been skewed by the people I've talked about and also the federal government and the mass media. And this is when you transcend and evolve, that the late Indian philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti talked about, the radical revolution for your mind. And when this happens, and you realize the walls aren't there, and you realize that most of the world is gray and not black and white, and that we are part of something bigger that transcends this earth that's behind me, is when you finally reached a higher level of nirvana and a higher level of consciousness that the US federal government, through the mass media, doesn't want you to attain. I'm not there yet, but I'm trying to evolve better. I've got a lot of work to do. I have my own demons, but I can understand and come to realize that there are no walls and that everybody is similar to each other. And the only way we're going to defeat this evil, and the federal government is evil, inherently evil, is the only way we're going to be free from the chains that they helped to create and to break down the walls that they made for us. And we need each other to do that. Good afternoon. Take care.